House Appropriations Subcommittee on Environment, Lakes, and Energy will come to order. Clerk, if you could take the roll.
Chair Cavett.
Here.
Representative Borton. Representative Markkinen.
Here.
Representative Steckloff.
Present.
Representative Price.
Here.
Mr. Chair, 4 of 5 members of the subcommittee are present. A quorum of the subcommittee is present.
All right, thank you, Clerk. Rep. Markkinen approves the minutes from, or moves to approve the minutes from April 29th, 25. There being no objections, the minutes are approved. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We appreciate that. We have Director of Air Quality Division from Eagle, Annette Schweitzer. So if you'd like to come up and take the table anytime you're ready. Thanks for being here today.
Yep. Good morning, and just briefly, Travis gets me every time. Good afternoon, and just briefly, Travis Boskel, Deputy Director with the agency. Annette is our Air Quality Division Director. She'll introduce herself and walk you through the work that they do.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm happy to walk you through the information about the Air Quality Division and the work that we do. It's okay. At the Air Quality Division, we take our mission very seriously to protect Michigan's air quality. Our work ensures that the air remains clean, and we do this by implementing federal and state air quality laws, working to minimize the adverse impact on the environment and public health. There are a few things, there's a lot of things that do affect air quality and the air that you breathe every day. There are a few things that we do regulate within the Air Quality Division, and there are a number of things that do impact air quality, but we don't regulate them as the Air Quality Division. So for the Air Quality Division, we regulate industrial sources, or we refer to them a lot as stationary sources of air emissions. And some of those include things like power plants, steel mills, emergency generators that might be operating if there's a potential power outage or an energy situation for facilities. A few things that we don't regulate and that are handled by either local other agencies or local governments include things like mobile sources, so that would be cars, trucks, planes. We also don't regulate outdoor wood boilers, noise and light pollution, and also indoor air quality. So on this next slide is a listing of the different programs, and I'll take time to go through each of these programs in my subsequent slides, but this just gives you a snapshot that we have a lot more to do with our Air Quality Division programs than just permitting inspections. I know that's a lot of what you may hear about is our permitting and compliance work. But we also have folks that work in the state that work on our emissions reporting. They do stack testing, enforcement work, and we also work on air quality planning and other things like that. So one of the most valuable resources that we have in our division is our team. This graphic shows our FY24 staff and includes recent investments in our permitting staff. With a large portion of our team having 0 to 5 years of experience working, we are diligently working to bring them up to speed. With the complexity of our work and the air regulations, it can take time to get those folks working independently. So our work is important and complex. We really want to ensure that those people on our team have the resources and are competent in their role because their roles are very important. So now I'm going to start going through our different program areas within the Air Quality Division and give you a brief overview of each of those. So first I'm going to talk about our air monitoring and our BioWatch program. Within our air monitoring section, we operate and maintain 45 air monitoring locations across the state, and we also run our BioWatch program. The air monitoring stations are required by federal law, and they're used to ensure compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are established federally. There are hundreds of pollutants monitored across those different locations across the state. And then our BioWatch program is a federally funded program to monitor for potential biothreats at key areas across the state. This is a Department of Homeland Security funded program, and all locations and sampling information is kept confidential. Next, we have folks that work in our air modeling and also work with meteorology. They do some dispersion modeling, which is modeling that's needed for air permit review. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about our different permitting programs. And then we also have, the group supports any quality of any planning that we do because of the collected air emissions. They use that information, and the modelers help with looking at that for any type of air quality planning that we need to do. There are some federal standards that get set and then also adjusted over time, and so this group helps provide information and support to showing if we are meeting those standards, and then things that we can do to help adjust to meet the standards if needed. We also have meteorologists on staff, and what they do is they do air quality forecasting. It's kind of like weather forecasting, where they're looking at meteorological conditions and they're giving estimates on what impacts might be good and bad for air pollution days. So this is really important to folks within the state that might have underlying health concerns like asthma, where knowing what the air quality is for key pollutants like fine particulate and ozone really help them decide how they might go about their day. Our air quality dashboard was very recently updated. I have put the link on the slide. It's michigan.gov/myair. And it's a great interactive dashboard where anyone from the public can access that information and see how the air quality is in their area on any given day. These alerts were particularly useful during the wildfire smoke days that we saw in 2023, during that summer when we saw those ground level impacts of wildfire smoke from Canada, which was very unusual for us in Michigan to have those impacts. So this information was very helpful to the public. So now I'll spend the next few slides talking about our air permitting programs. We have two distinct air permitting programs within the Air Quality Division. One has to do with the installation of new equipment. That's our construction permitting program, or we refer to that as a permit to install program. And then we also have another program, which is our Title V program, which is for larger sources. And what that program does is it takes permit to installs and it puts them into one larger permit for a facility that's a larger type of source of air emissions. So both of our air permitting programs are required, and most of the requirements are found within the Federal Clean Air Act, so they are federally required permitting programs. Our permit to install program is required for industrial stationary sources, so like I spoke about earlier, those types of sources that we permit through our air permitting program are those that are not mobile, so nothing like cars or anything like that. It's all those stationary sources. We have staff that review the permit applications, and they're located in Lansing. And we currently have 23 permit engineers working on these applications, and we receive roughly 300 to 400 applications per year, divided throughout the year. And a unique thing about the permit to install is there's not like a renewal where you have to reapply and get a renewal. The only time that that permit would be updated is if the company is asking to make a change or adjustment to that permit and triggering a new permit review. So those permits are I look at them as a snapshot in time of you're looking at it at the time when we permit it, that's when the regulations apply. And so unless the company's doing something to make a change, then we don't go back and look at those permits again. We in Michigan do not have a fee for our permit to install program. There are a lot of other states across the United States that do have a fee-based program for permits to install, but we don't in Michigan. So the other type of permitting program that we have is called our Title V program. And so as I mentioned before, this is the program that's meant for larger sources of air emissions. And this program takes permits, compiles them into one permit document, and this permitting program does have a renewal period. So this permit is renewed every 5 years, and so we have dedicated staff within our district offices that work on this permitting program. And so there's an initial application and then also a renewal every 5 years once that source has a renewable operating permit. There are requirements in the Clean Air Act for this to be a fee-based program. So we do have emissions fees associated with our Title V program. And so that is a fee-based program where we have a formula that is prescribed within the Act for that program. Sorry. So a little bit more about the permits to install. I'm going to focus the next 2 slides on that program because that is our construction permitting program. We have timelines built into our rules for processing of those permits. So the permit applications, we do have rule and statutory requirements that may require public comment or public participation, as we refer to it, for certain permit applications. Of the 300 to 400 permit applications we receive a year, around 15 or so, well, there are 15 in the last fiscal year, but about 15 will go out to public comment. So there are different timelines for that because there is more time associated with that public comment period. So within the rule, we have 180 days to process a permit with no public comment, 240 days to process a permit with public comment. There is an allowance for an agreement between a company and our staff if more time is needed, where we can get, we refer to it as a Rule 206 extension, but the company has to request it and it has to be agreeable to both parties, and there's an agreement signed to extend that processing period. So those are the rule amounts, but in the last fiscal year, so fiscal year 24, we had an average of 101 days in processing the permit applications overall. And then if you take out the extensions that were given, the processing time drops down to 80 days on average over all the applications that were reviewed by the permit section. And so with the 180 days and 240 days, there is a lot of time that goes into the review of those permit applications. Our staff review the applications for making sure that it complies with all federal and state rules. And so that can take a lot of time depending on the type of equipment that's being installed. There can be multiple federal regulations and rules that a subject may be subject to. So it does take some time for that review to happen. We also, not only do our permit engineers review the information within the application, it also involves other staff within the division to make sure that there's agreement with the conditions. So with our district staff, we also have staff that look at air toxic contaminants from the potential process, and we also have some of our modeling and meteorology staff that help with the permit review as well. And so one thing that we look at, and we continue to look at, is making sure we have an efficient permitting program. These are pre-construction programs, so we do our best to make sure that we're finding efficient ways to process the applications. And we do have an IT modernization project that was done for our division that I'll talk a little bit about later that is working to help streamline our permitting process more. So now I'll move on from permitting to talking a little bit about our compliance and enforcement staff. Our compliance and enforcement staff are located in district offices across the state as well as in Lansing. We have a federal program that dictates how often we inspect certain types of facilities. So larger sources or our Title V facilities, we're required to inspect those every 2 years. And then we have sources that we refer to as synthetic biners, or they're taking restrictions within a permit to make them less than any kind of major source identification. So those facilities we have to inspect every 5 years. We also are responsive to complaints, and we inspect smaller sources as well. And this is all put into our compliance monitoring strategy that's required for us to submit to the Environmental Protection Agency for review, and to make sure that we're aligning with the federal requirements as well as they're in agreement with our state approach. So Michigan has approximately 3,000 permitted facilities across the state, and about 350 of those are Title V or larger. So we have quite a few permitted states, and then a large number that are those larger facilities. So part of what we do as well is be responsive to complaints. So in the last fiscal year, we received over 2,000 complaints, and we received and responded to those. And then following up with our regular inspections as well as response to complaints, those resulted in 336 violation notices or alleged violations at facilities. And when we do that, the company has an opportunity to respond or to provide corrective action. There are times where there is corrective action that cannot be agreed to, so it can get escalated into our enforcement group. And so we had 26 enforcement cases in the last fiscal year, and those enforcement cases, sometimes we have situations where they're a type of violation where it must be escalated to our enforcement group, and then other cases where there just is not resolution that can be found at the district level, so we have to elevate it to our enforcement group. And then at times, the state attorney's general's office may get involved depending on the situation, and depending if the federal government is involved, sometimes the Department of Justice may become involved as well. So the next couple of groups I'm going to talk about are part of our field operations, which our compliance and enforcement staff are part of our field operations as well. We have our next group, our technical programs group. And so these are folks that go out when a company has emission limits and a permit. So a lot of times we'll establish emission limits to make sure that they're meeting requirements of the federal and state regulations. And this group reviews testing plans. They go out to make sure that the testing companies that are doing the stack testing are doing it correctly and that they're meeting the methods that are required. So there are federally established methods that you have to use when you're making sure you're complying with the emission limits. We also have a dry cleaning licensing program within the state. This program is for facilities that are actually subject to the licensing inspection program, and they have to be subject to a federal national emission standard for them to actually be subject to licensing and permitting. And so it requires the facility to emit a specific type of chemical called perchloroethylene. And so it is a very small subset of dry cleaners. So it's not like any dry cleaner you see is going to be subject to our licensing and inspection program. A lot of the places that you might see where you drop your clothing off, they're not actually doing the dry cleaning there. They send it off to a dry cleaning facility where they're actually doing the actual dry cleaning of the clothes. Next we have our asbestos program. For years, our asbestos staff have overseen the inspection and notification process for asbestos removal, subject to the federal regulations for asbestos. And not all asbestos removal is subject to that federal regulation. So if it's an individual doing some type of removal in their own house, it's not subject to that federal regulation. It's when there's a large project and it might be a contractor who's doing removal at a number of different houses that would be subject to the federal regulation, as well as any large commercial removals of asbestos that may be happening. And so for this program, it's a notification and inspection program. We have a newly formed asbestos unit to support the legislation that was recently passed regarding asbestos in the state. And we're in the process of adding 3 additional staff. That new legislation did have requirements for an initial and subsequent asbestos, like a fee associated with those asbestos notifications, making sure that contractor background checks are happening. And then we also have some metrics established within that legislation as well of a percentage of inspections that we do based on the notifications. So in the last fiscal year, we had over 11,000 notifications, and we did almost around 2,000 inspections. And our asbestos staff, we currently have about 5 staff working within that unit, and we do get a lot of notifications a year for asbestos, so we're working to build out that team to be able to meet the metrics within the legislation. We're currently meeting that first tier of the metric, and as we build out the team, we're confident that we'll continue to meet the metrics that were established. So now I'm going to be moving away from our field operations and talking about a little bit more of the support work of our division, and that includes some of our emissions reporting. So our emissions reporting unit, they work to collect all of the information of emissions that are reported by industry every year, and there are federal requirements for emissions reporting that we implement. Those emissions are compiled, and then we use that information for any billing that we need to do for our Title V program. So this is tied to those emissions fees that we collect for that larger permitting program. They also provide support for data for our permit group if they need information. They also are able to provide information about control strategies or control technologies if we need to look into that. And then the last group that I'll be discussing is our air quality planning group. Our air quality planning group, they're the ones that establish rules. They look to see if we need to update any rules. They also work for any implementation planning that we need to do. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards are federally set health-based guidelines that are set by the Environmental Protection Agency. Every 5 years, the Environmental Protection Agency is required to review those National Ambient Air Quality Standards and see if they're still health protective based on the most recent scientific data. So an example, more recently, the fine particulate or PM 2.5 standard was updated. And so what that does is that sets a new level for us to evaluate whether or not our counties in Michigan are meeting that standard. And then this group works to look at, are we meeting those standards? And also, if we are not, what is a plan that we need to put into place to get there? And so it's something that we're kind of continually looking at because the EPA will adjust those standards periodically. They also are involved in our rulemaking process. And during both of those processes, we do have a lot of stakeholder involvement. We create work groups, and we work to make sure that we bring in industry folks that may be impacted by any changes to our rules. So we have a stakeholder process that's part of that. All right. And I wanted to show this infographic just because it's a good way to show. It's from the Environmental Protection Agency website. It's a good illustration of the federal air quality standards and how they've worked to really drive down air pollution across the country since the 1990s. This is a national air quality trend, so we are looking at it from a nationwide perspective. But when you do look at some of the emission data from Michigan, it follows a very similar trend. And as like the federal regulations get updated, you do see kind of those dips and changes in the overall air pollution trends. I wanted to mention our IT modernization project, which is referred to as for My Enviro Portal. And My Enviro Portal is a new holistic system that we launched just this year for the Air Quality Division, where it consolidates all of our data and information into one system. One thing that it also does is it took our permitting process that was a paper-based process and has converted it to an electronic permit application system, which kind of catches us up with other states, and it will help streamline that permitting process of better ways for us to get information and really working to make sure that we have that information accessible to the public as well. So it's a great way for anyone to be able to look at applications that we have, information about facilities, and it's also meant to streamline and make things a little bit easier for industry as they've set up accounts, and once they have those set up, it's easier for them to submit applications. And then my last slide just talks a little bit about some of the stakeholder engagement that we've had within the Air Quality Division. We do strive to engage with our stakeholders as much as possible. We have an Air Advisory Council that is a group made up of industry, environmental, universities, and others that can come to meet with us about air quality issues. We also have public meetings and hearings where we've worked to make sure that we have an opportunity for meaningful involvement from the public. We've worked to really improve that process when we do have public participation that's required. I already mentioned during our planning and rules process, we do have stakeholder involvement there, and we create work groups. We also have been involved in a lot of training and outreach regarding the division. The email subscriber list, up to 44,000, has a lot to do with our new My Enviro portal system and having a lot of new subscribers that are trying to get information out of that. And then we work a lot with a number of organizations, go to speaking engagements, also have an example would be monthly meetings that I join for the Michigan Manufacturers Association. And that's what I have.
With that, we'd be happy to take questions from the committee.
All right, thank you very much. Very informative. As we reach out to some of those stakeholders, they seem impressed with your division right now. There wasn't a lot of naysayers out there, so take that for what it's worth there. But any questions? Rep. Stepkloff.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today. the air quality is something that I'm deeply concerned about. I know I have a husband who checks the air quality every single day. And as microplastics continue to be so prevalent in our air quality, how is the federal government's cutting of regulations affecting us in Michigan? I know there's new EOs coming out on a daily basis. It's kind of hard to keep up with all the chaos, but I do know that there were cuts to NOAA. Are those cuts to NOAA going to affect how we can track air quality?
Thanks, Travis. So with our air quality, how we track the air quality and the information we use all comes from our network within
Okay.
Michigan. And we don't have a direct tie with like funding from NOAA or anything like that for our air quality monitors. And we do collect our own meteorological data at those stations. So we're able to use that and to forecast ourselves. And so the information that you might see like on your weather app or where it talks about air quality, that comes from our meteorologists in Michigan if it's related to a Michigan source. So we share that information out with the National Weather Service, and so they include it in their alerts as well.
Very impressive. Thank you.
One item I'll add to that, just because it's very timely and it applies to your all's job in this room. The president's FY26, the White House proposed budget came out last Friday, and one of the things it proposed to do, and this doesn't just apply to ANET's programs, but it proposed to eliminate the categorical grants that the states receive from the federal government for running these federally designated programs. So just in ANET's division, for instance, that's 19% of her budget. Now, I will say, we've seen presidential proposals that look like this before, and oftentimes Congress and the states, we communicate pretty clearly the importance of that funding and the services that it supports and provides. So I don't say that to be inflammatory or say, the sky is falling, but just so you all understand the implications that the federal budget and programs can have on what we do in this room and what Annette does and her team does around the state.
Thank you. And follow, Rep. Price.
Thank you. My question was around just that, so thank you for making us aware of it. And just a follow-up to it, like what will it mean for the safety and health of Michiganders if the Air Quality Division loses that 19% based on the loss of the federal funding?
Yeah. I can start. So a lot of the funding that we get from the federal government does support our air monitoring network. So it supports that important information about air quality in the state. It also supports some of our staff doing some of the work at smaller sources, which are really important and can be very impactful to people. A lot of the complaints we do get are about some of those smaller sources that money from the federal government helps fund. So it could impact our ability to do some of that work. Let you. Okay.
I know your agency is very interested in carbon sequestration or carbon capture. What would that do for the air quality if we developed a regulatory system to have carbon sequestration or carbon capture? How would that improve our air quality?
I can speak a little bit about that. We do have a little bit of regulation under Air Quality Division regarding greenhouse gases. So with the carbon sequestration, it would help with minimizing any of those more climate-based pollutants and climate-based impacts. We don't have direct regulation of carbon that way for carbon sequestration. It's very limited oversight within the Air Quality Division programs, and a lot of the climate work that's being done is outside of the Air Quality Division. But there would be some co-benefit in terms of reducing those types of pollutants. Let's see. Do you have anything to add? Okay, all right.
You mentioned forest fires. We recently had some storms up north that were catastrophic, and there's a lot of debris, and we're not sure how to remove that debris yet, and we're working on that. People are very concerned about forest fires. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit about what you've done in the past with forest fires, maybe go into a little deeper on that, and what you're looking for, and any thoughts you might have?
So within Michigan, in terms of looking at forest fires, and we look at them more from the impact on our air quality from our air monitoring stations and seeing how that's impacting. We've had a role in trying to inform the public and try and make sure everyone is aware of what the potential impacts might be from a health perspective. And we look at forest fires from a lens of it doesn't have a regulatory thing that we can do that will minimize or change that. We do have some state requirements and about open burning and things like that. So we do have conversations when it comes to things like prescribed burns and things to try and avoid a potential forest fire. So we do have some involvement there, but we don't have a lot of oversight over the forest management.
I'll just tag on to that too. Not so much to the air quality piece, but I know in the follow-up to the storms up there with all the debris on the ground, one of the things that we can do as we're trying to advise about the impacts to air quality of potentially burning that. We also, on the flip side, we're helping identify where could this material go, right? So we probably don't want to put it in a landfill necessarily. So working with, I think we ended up helping find some folks who could mulch it up and start using it for other locations. So on the waste side of our programs and the materials management programs, we can help find another end source and help advise the best way to take care of it that way.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. Very well
Thank
done.
you.
All right. Well, let's see. No more questions from members. That Rep. Markkinen moves to excuse absent members. No objection. Okay. There being no objections, the motion prevails. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.